Hello, everyone. Today we're going to continue with the Cold War. Mainly, we're going to be talking about the Vietnam War, but we're also going to be talking about China and the Watergate scandal. So, for starters, let's talk about Vietnam. This is Vietnam right here. In the 1950s, Vietnam was split in half, and northern Vietnam was communist, while the southern part of Vietnam was democratic. And the Vietnam War. American involvement in Vietnam also reflected the Cold War policy of containment of communism. So the U.S. did not want communism to spread. So just remember, containment means we don't want communism to spread. And beginning in the 1950s and continuing into the early 1960s, the communist government of North Vietnam attempted to install through force, which is by war, a communist government in South Vietnam. The United States helped South Vietnam fight. So North Vietnam, which is communist, took their army and they tried to attack South Vietnam, which is democratic. In the U.S., we don't want communism to spread, so we were helping South Vietnam. The American military buildup in Vietnam began under President John F. Kennedy. As we learned last class, President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963 in Dallas, Texas. And assassinated means he was killed. This is actually right before he was killed. He was in this car and somebody shot him in the head and he died. And the event shook the nation's confidence and began a period of internal strife and divisiveness. So when the Vietnam War happened, many Americans did not agree with each other. For example, the disagreements over the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. A lot of people thought the United States should not be in Vietnam. Some people did think we should be there, but it was divided. A lot of people didn't agree. And the buildup of the American military in Vietnam was intensified under President Lyndon B. Johnson. So Kennedy started it, but when Lyndon Johnson was president, it got much bigger. He sent a lot of troops there. And the scale of combat in Vietnam grew larger during the 1960s. American military forces repeatedly defeated the North Vietnamese forces in the field, but they fought a limited war. And when it says limited, it just means the United States would only fight up until the 17th parallel. We wouldn't go into North Vietnam. So we fought, but only up to the 17th parallel. So I'll go ahead and put that in. The United States only fought up to the 17th parallel. Alright, next slide. America became bitterly divided and didn't agree over the Vietnam War. And on college campuses, many opposed the war, and students actively protested and opposed the war. This is a photo of a college campus, but a lot of people opposed the war and they protested. They held up signs, they didn't go to class. Sort of like last week or a couple weeks ago where we had a lot of students left class to protest gun control. And after Johnson declined to seek election, President Richard Nixon was elected on a pledge to bring the war to an honorable end. So Johnson, he didn't seek re-election, and a big reason why is because a lot of Americans didn't like him because of the Vietnam War. So he didn't run for office again. Nixon instituted a policy of Vietnamization, which is the withdrawing of American troops and replacing them with South Vietnamese forces while maintaining military aid to the South Vietnamese. So he said, we're going to withdraw, which means they're going to take out all of the troops from South Vietnam. And the United States, we're going to just maintain military aid. So that means we're going to give them weapons, give them guns, give them planes, but we're not going to fight in the war anymore. And by 1973, the United States removed all of their troops from Vietnam. So 1973 is when U.S. involvement in the war ended. However, Vietnamization, it failed when South Vietnamese troops proved unable to resist invasion by the Soviet-supplied North Vietnamese army. So when it says Soviet supplied, it just means the Soviet Union supplied them. They gave North Vietnamese weapons, but the Soviets didn't fight. And since the U.S. left, Vietnam lost. And in 1975, North and South Vietnam merged under communist control. So this just means the whole country became communist. Today, if you look at a map, there's no North Vietnam, there's no South Vietnam, it's just Vietnam. And after the Vietnam War, which the northern side of Vietnam won, it became a communist country. And unlike veterans of World War II who returned to a grateful and supportive nation, Vietnam veterans returned often to face indifference or outright hostility from some who opposed the war. So that just means when people came home from the Vietnam War, a lot of people did not treat soldiers who fought in Vietnam well. So a lot of people, they didn't think they deserved anything, they were mean to them, they didn't like people who fought in Vietnam. However, many, many years later, the wounds began to heal in America. We recognize them now and we honor them, but during that time we didn't. If you actually go to DC, we have a Vietnam War Memorial. This is the Vietnam War Memorial right here. Okay, now we're going to talk about something separate, and that's the U.S. and China. And while negotiating an end to the Vietnam War, President Nixon, with the Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, instituted the Cold War policy of detente. And detente led to Nixon's visit to China and the U.S. formal recognition of the communist-controlled People's Republic of China. And all that means is we went into China, we started talking to them, we kind of became friends even though they were communist, and we recognized, yes, you're a communist country, and we started working with them a lot. And because the U.S. and China were getting along now, due to this relaxing of tensions between the United States and China, the Soviets sought to improve relations with the United States, leading to the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, also known as SALT. But all it means is the Soviet Union and the United States would limit how many weapons they have. So there used to be a time where they would have thousands and thousands of weapons, the United States and USSR. But now when it comes to nuclear weapons, there's limits. So for instance, nuclear missiles, the United States can have 200, Soviet Union, which is the USSR, can also have 200. And intercontinental ballistic missiles, which is another weapon, US can have 1,054, Soviet Union 1,550. Warheads, same amount, and nuclear subs, that's how many they can have. So this treaty, the SALT one, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, it just limited how many nuclear weapons the US and Soviet Union had. And last thing we're going to talk about is the Watergate scandal. And in 1972, 5 men were caught breaking into the Democratic National Committee office in the Watergate Hotel. So the Watergate Hotel, that's just a hotel, and 5 people were caught breaking into it, trying to steal documents. And these men were actually found to be connected to the Nixon administration, leading to his eventual resignation from office. So President Nixon, he quit because he was caught trying to steal stuff from the Democratic National Committee, and it wasn't him stealing it, but he told people to steal for him. So he's I think he's the only person who actually had to quit being president. He would have been impeached, he wouldn't have been president, so he resigned, he quit. Alright, if you guys have any questions, let me know.